Welcome. Thank you for coming by this afternoon. We know we've got a lot of things happening this afternoon. And again, this conference is in Vegas, so we do appreciate you, coming back into the fold, and definitely coming to our session. So this session will look at the teaching and learning framework that has been used. It's been practiced for 2 years, and this year it was fully implemented in the Los Angeles Unified School District. This is sort of the new way and concept that teachers are being not only supported in LA Unified, but also valued in the Los Angeles Unified School District. So we're going to take turns introducing ourselves, but my name is David Carr, and I was a 1993 Teach for America Corps member in Los Angeles, and I'm now a teaching and learning coordinator for LA Unified. And to my right.
Great. My name is Jolene Shavira. I'm a 97 Corps member, Los Angeles as well, and I am a program and policy policy development advisor, PPDA. It's our acronym for it. And I work in talent management and essentially support the development of our new teacher evaluation and school leader evaluation, which is coming online as well.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany Estrada. I'm an 08 LA Corps member. I'm a program and policy development coordinator, and I started my work at LAUSD working with all these fine folks in talent management, developing and piloting our teacher growth and development cycle, which we'll be sharing with you today. And right now I have the privilege of leading some work around professional learning management, which we see as like the next wave of the work, right? If any of you attended a session that one of our board members was at and talked about not doing evaluation just for evaluation's sake, but it should be evaluation and support. So I get to kind of lead some work around what do we do now that we know where we're at? How do we all get better? So that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I'm Lauren Greiger. I'm a New York City 2004 Corps member and a PPDA like Jolene. I've been working in talent management also with the teacher and the school leader evaluation rollout, and one of my primary responsibilities has actually been taking this online and the technology that we use to support all of this work and make sure that the technology supports our process and the philosophy that are approaching this work with. So we're gonna all like kind of tag team. So So today we're gonna talk to you guys a little bit about just kind of the policy history around the work that we've been doing in educator effectiveness in Los Angeles. We're going to give you a little bit drilled down to the teacher growth and development cycle, which is our teacher evaluation and growth process that we're going to give you more detail about, but knowing that it's in a larger context of educator effectiveness, and we're also talking about school leaders and all of the other employees in a district that support the work that goes on in a school site. And then you're going to get to do a little bit of an exercise. We're going to do it through the eyes of an observer. What does it mean and look like going into an LAUSD classroom with this new process as an observer or school leader? And then at the end, we're going to kind of go into what our human capital approach is as the district and how does this all kind of come together, and share with you some of the lessons that have come out of the first few years of this work. So today we just want you to understand the context around this human capital work, and particularly in LA Unified, what this means to us, and also just some of the challenges around implementation at a district such as LA Unified. But before we kind of dive in, we just wanted to kind of get a sense of who you guys are a little bit. So we have a few questions. You don't have to stand up. I know it's like my time that I probably need an espresso right now, but so you guys can stay seated if you want. But just raise your hand if you are from or have lived or have ever taught in Los Angeles. Okay. But raise your hand if you had to take a plane to get to Las Vegas. Okay. Raise your hand if you're still in the classroom. Raise your hand if you're a school administrator of any kind, dean, principal. Raise your hand if you've ever used a sort of framework, not necessarily our framework, but a framework to go and observe teachers. Okay, cool. So this is not necessarily going to be new work for you guys, but we just wanted to kind of give context, and so you guys can all have that context as well. So if you were in the session with Steve Zimmer, I think that Evan stole our slide because we wanted to give you a little context just about LA Unified, and in particular because when we talk about our lessons learned and the challenges that we're facing, a lot of it has to do with the scale and the diversity of our district. So LAUSD is the second largest district in the country. We have over 640,000 students and over 45,000 certificated employees. There's a lot of charters in our district, and that's, in our experience, has been a really good thing. Some of us have had charter experience as well, and we've learned a lot from each other in this work. And then we're just really large. It takes a long time to drive from our furthest school in the north down to the furthest school in the south, and from the west to the east. And so that in itself is just a really big challenge in terms of communication, in terms of rollout, in terms of resources, and actually getting people out to schools to support. So a little bit of just kind of background. What really drives the work that we're doing is, as I mentioned just before, ensuring the fundamental right that every student is taught by an effective teacher every day. But that's also in a school led by an effective leader and supported by effective staff. So we're really thinking about how do we change and make sure that all employees are being supported. So back in 2009, and now that our board member's here, you guys can all pepper him with questions after. But there was the Teacher Effectiveness Task Force, and that's what really got this work going. It was a very large kind of coalition made up of all stakeholders. We had teachers, principals, community members, union represented participants, and they all kind of came together and provided a set of recommendations for our district to move forward. And that's where we grounded all of our work. And the first couple of recommendations are what we're actually going to focus on for the most part. They really wanted a multiple measure evaluation for teachers and for school leaders that would inform all decisions. So multiple measures, and we'll talk about that a little bit more during this session. And then the second thing was they really wanted support. They wanted coherent and targeted support and development for all employees. So that's really been the focus for the first few years of our work. And just to kind of go back from where we started, sometimes you hear all these wonderful things that are happening in other districts. We've been at this work, it seems like not for very long, but we started back in 2010, and we're almost in year 5 of where we're going with this. And so you can just kind of see for teachers, we actually piloted for 2 years this new framework that you're going to get a chance to look at today. We got a lot of feedback, made a lot of changes, and that's kind of been our team's MO as we go ahead, is we really want to hear and change and improve and make the system and what we're doing better. So last year, this past school year, was the first year we went for stakes with this new teacher observation process and evaluation process that we're going to be looking at, and we did that with about 6,000 teachers across the district. And so this year, also you'll see, we did a pilot with our school leaders, and we're building out a school leadership framework that's very similar in many ways because we want coherence and alignment throughout the work that we're doing. But as you can see, there's just a lot going on, and it has taken us time, and we are trying to be really thoughtful about how we roll out this work. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit and dive into what we've been doing with teachers and get you guys some hands-on experience with that. So I'm going to hand it over.
Okay, so I'm going to try and give you sort of an overview of the teacher growth and development cycle. So as Lauren mentioned, the district was looking to create these sort of multiple measures, to totally sort of quantify and see, how many effective teachers we have, and sort of use all of these things to sort of put them all together. So this is what, we've been sort of working on. And as you can see, the biggest piece of this is the observation of practice. And so what is actually happening in the confines of the classroom. And coupled with the observation of practice, you have, obviously professional development and also some sort of coaching that provides opportunities for growth within teacher practice. The different pillars that are underneath the observation of practice become stakeholder feedback, so definitely, getting in tune with how the students feel about what the teaching and learning is like in their classrooms, contributions a teacher or a group of teachers make to the school community. So actually working together with each other so that, all the biology teachers are working together because they know what the physics teachers expect. next year. The fourth grade teachers working together relentlessly because they understand that the fifth grade teachers' expectations are going to be, X, Y, Z. So looking at that, and then also, contributions to student outcomes. So definitely looking and making student data, achievement data part of that as well. And then all of this is sort of the bedrock of this becomes the teaching and learning framework and the Common Core standards. And that becomes your foundation that encompasses this multiple measures piece. And this is the piece that we're going to sort of land on right here, the hardest today, the observation and practice. So the first question I think folks had in mind when all of this was taking place was like, okay, we're going to use a framework, but why do we need a framework? Like, why do we actually have to have something? And as you can see, from the cartoon here, you probably have, principal, teacher, and we're talking about apples and oranges. And again, this is kind of what the evaluation system has been. It's about thinking like, I'm going to be, observed on X, but I'm evaluated on Y. Or I'm not really sure what I'm going to be evaluated on, to steal a line from the craps tables over here in Vegas. It's a crapshoot, so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with regards to my coaching and evaluation. Maybe they'll be in sync, maybe they won't. So with the framework, you now have a common language that people are coming to the table to. The administrator and the teacher are coming together, based on a common language, and hopefully based on some key evidence that's been collected in the classroom. So our conversation about teacher practice isn't based on what we think, it's not based on a guess, it's not based on our personalities, whether or not you and I get along or don't get along. It's because whether we get along or not is irrelevant. What we need to know is what's happening in that classroom, and we need to base it on a common language, and that common language, unified, is in fact the framework. And so we've obviously adopted the framework created by Charlotte Danielson, which is a framework that school districts across the country are using right now. It's aligned to the California standards for the teaching profession, and it definitely is designed in such a way that it integrates the Common Core standards within it. So if you're using the framework, you're also sort of building upon what's expected within Common Core. And one of the things we've tried to do is because, again, and you all know this, and I'm preaching to the choir, when it comes down to it in education, folks, especially teachers and administrators feel like, I'm just being bombarded with all these different things. All these different things are coming at me, and they don't make any sense. And we've really tried to let folks know that there is sort of a method to the madness, if you will, that there are these connections. LA Unified, as we illuminated, it's a huge district. It's the second largest district in the nation, but it encompasses the most second language learners in the country. Okay, so we've got the most second language learners being educated, in the United States today. So we have an EL master plan to meet the needs of those students, meet the needs of the EL students. So the EL master plan becomes who we teach. Okay, the Common Core standards is what we teach, and now with the teaching and learning framework, we have sort of a roadmap on how we can get this teaching done and how these things can look within the confines of the classroom. So on your tables, you actually have a copy of the framework, the teaching and learning framework. And Teach for America was generous enough to make color copies of this, which is great. So I thank you for this, definitely. And as you can see, so in the framework itself, you've got 5 standards, you've got 19 what we call components, and then you've got 61 elements that are on that framework. And through many surveys of teachers, surveys of principals, we've landed on 15 elements that we're looking at in the confines of the classroom. So those become the focus elements. So you've got 4 in Standard 1, 3 in Standard 2, which deals with the classroom environment, 7 in Standard 3, delivery of instruction. There's 1 in Standard 5, professional growth, and there isn't a focus element in Standard 4 as of yet, but these are the ones that we've sort of landed on. And these are the ones that basically administrators are looking for when they go into classrooms, both formally and informally. And as you can see, the focus elements in Standard 1 and Standard 5, those are happening like outside the classroom. That's your planning and preparation, and that's also your reflection. Whereas the ones in Standard 2 and 3, that's happening inside the classroom. So that's where the observer is coming in now and really trying to focus in on what the teacher is saying and doing and what the students are saying and doing.
David,
Oh, yeah.
How did the 15 get selected that are the
Oh, I think, and my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the first year of sort of, practice with this, we just sort of said, okay, let's see if we can find all 61. Let's see if we can actually do that. And I think, the pushback from both teachers and administrators were like, that's just too much. That's just too much. And so I think the feeling was, okay, if we survey folks, if we do, focus groups with folks, which elements do you think would give us the most bang for our educational buck? Which are the elements that are going to truly, let us know that honest to goodness teaching and learning is happening in the classroom? And these were the 15 that folks landed on, time and time again.
And will they remain consistent year over school year over school year?
My hunch is that there won't be too many changes to this every year, but that at the very least, some will be added or some will be toyed with. Like, if you see on your sheet, there are 2 focus elements that aren't highlighted, and they're not even focus elements, but they're underlined. One of them has to do with the outreach that teachers do with parents. Because there have been a ton of teachers who have told us over and over again, here are all the things I'm doing to integrate the parents into the instruction in my classroom. So there's a part on the platform that has been built out for those teachers who are doing these things to upload that as evidence, as key evidence, whether it's a math night and you can say on this date and time I did this, or they can scan the attendance sheet and put that in. And there's also a focus element there that really looks at what teachers are doing with regards to professional development on their class. We've got some schools where it's the teachers who are running the PD. Some of the pilot schools in LA Unified, you've got teachers really, they're the ones doing the Tuesday professional development. We want these folks to get credit for that. So things like that are happening. I don't know that there'll be a drastic change, and I don't know. I don't think we'll revert back to all 61, but anything's possible. Public education. But yeah, that answers your question. So the other thing you have on your table is a handout that looks specifically at one of the focus elements. Now, this is the rubric of the framework. So as you can see, you've got the focus element, quality and purpose of questions, and you've got the descriptors of where someone would lie if they were ineffective, developing, effective, or highly effective. Okay, and so this is sort of the language of the rubric that's used, that the teacher has and the administrator has. What I'd like you to do, let's take the next 4 minutes. It's your first mini activity. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz as far as you know. But what I'd like you to do is just take some time to not only read the rubric, but with a pencil or pen, just circle, highlight, underline some of the keywords and phrases that you see, under each descriptor. What are some of the words that jump out at you? And if possible, maybe you can pick up a certain pattern that's happening as you glide from ineffective, developing to effective, and highly effective. So take about maybe 4 minutes to do that.
Clarifying question. What does CO stand for? Question designed to challenge students at a higher level.
So you can see this in the classroom observation.
Okay.
I like that.
Colorado.
But good guess. Good guess. Not Colorado. Classroom observation. But maybe 1 more minute. Right, in the interest of time, I'm gonna call time and see what you came up with. Old Spanish teacher would say, "Voluntarios o víctimas." Share out for me what came up. What did you see? When you sort of are looking at this, what keywords? What keywords stand out in the ineffective box? Yes.
I definitely saw, the student understanding all the way across, and then from not revealing all the way to understanding through reasoning.
Okay, so definitely, so here we're starting off with not over here. So the questions are not revealing. There's a lot of not in that box, right? So, in terms of the questions, not revealing student understanding, they're also like not comprehensible, right, to most students. Then what happens when you get to the development portion? Yeah, so now you've got some students who are there, right? I mean, I think a lot of folks, a lot of teachers, want to stay away from, definitely want to stay away from the ineffective, which is a good thing, right? They want to stay away from that, but then they even see developing, and they're like, I don't know how I feel about that either. I want to get over here. And with developing, you've got some skills. They just need to be refined a little bit, right? So you've got like some of the questions are there, and they're some are low quality, some are high quality. Okay. How about in the effective box? What's happening there?
Most.
Okay, so now, most of the questions here are sort of revealing, the student thinking, student understanding. Most of them are relevant. And then finally, with highly effective, what's happening here?
Demonstrate, not learn.
Yeah, so it's not, it's all, and like, who else is asking the questions here?
Students.
Okay. And I think that's probably the place where all of us who were in the classroom, that's where we want to get to. Okay, whereas in all of these, in effective, developing, and effective, the teacher's doing the heavy lifting. Okay, the teacher is the one sort of doing the heavy lifting and sweating to the oldies in that classroom, right? Whereas when you get here to the highly effective, there's now a give and take. Now the teacher's still doing a little bit of the heavy lifting, but now it's the students who are sort of taking ownership. And they're the ones now, in this case, coming up with their own questions. And well done. And these were the main priorities that sort of call those ideas out. Like with the framework really calls out the ideas of cognitive engagement, constructivist learning, and these 21st century skills. And obviously, the buzzword 21st century skills, people just think technology, but we're definitely talking about, critical thinking, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And again, this idea of the learning being done by the learner. So again, and this is what Common Core calls out, is that they really want to see the students sort of struggle with each other and push each other to learn, as opposed to, again, the teacher just sort of funneling all the knowledge to them. So that's kind of the bird's eye view, I think, of the framework. I'm going to hand it off to Brittany, who is going to lead us through the eyes of the observer here and show you what this looks like with the administrator.
Great. So now that you have a little bit of an idea of what our teaching and learning framework looks like by diving into one of the elements, I'm going to be taking you through a couple exercises that will help you understand what high quality evidence looks like in our observation process. But before I go in there, I think it's important for some context to understand that the portion that Dave just went through and the portion that I'm going to go through is part of a 5-day observer training that we're giving you in under an hour. So we don't expect you to be experts or be certified observers like our principals actually have to be. Our principals actually have to take a test at the end of that 5-day observer training where they have to certify in certain competencies in order to be able to reliably assess teacher practice in our district. But we're hoping that by taking you through some of these exercises, you'll begin to kind of see the changes and shifts that we've seen and how our principals now see our teachers and their practice that happens in their classroom. So I'll bring you back to our multiple measures diagram that we've been talking about. So Dave just walked us through our teaching and learning framework, which serves as our foundation. We mentioned that we have these various buckets of evidence collection, and what I'm really going to be focusing in on now is the observation of practice. But it's important to kind of think about the way that this observation process works is that we're taking evidence and we're saying, how does that evidence align or relate to our understanding of effective teaching? So I'm collecting this evidence, this data from your classroom, and then we're going to use that and look at it in relation to the framework. And I hope y'all don't mind, I'm like a walker, I can't stand it. So it's like a teacher habit, like proximity. Are you listening?
Yes, I'm totally
But I'm a walker, so don't get weirded out by that. So this is a brief overview of what our observation and practice looks like for our teacher growth and development cycle. And through this cycle, there are a variety of phases. So we have 2 formal observations, which are announced. We have at least 2 informal observations, which are unannounced. We have opportunities for teacher reflection, such as through the self-assessment. And we also have opportunities for collaborative conversations between the school leader and the teacher, where evidence is shared and where like collaborative growth planning processes take place. So to kind of bring some more context to this process is vastly different from what we used to do a couple years ago. So a couple years ago, if a teacher was being evaluated, they would be observed a couple times. And the feedback they would be given could be something really robust and specific and actionable, or it could be a few bullets like, good intro, kids were on task, nice job, see you in 5 years, right? And what we found from that in our conversations with teachers and principals when looking at our student outcomes is that we weren't providing that actionable, specific, and timely feedback to our teachers that we know is a good thing for kids, but we don't do it for adults, but it's really essential for helping them improve their practice. So that was a big thing that we wanted to change. And it's obviously had a tremendous amount of impact in the way that principals kind of go through this process with their teachers. So a big portion of that, though, is really, again, around this idea of evidence collection. So we went from good job, nice intro, or kids were on task, to this high-quality evidence, which we're going to be kind of sharing with you today. So when principals go through this observer training, they learn about 3 major competencies in evidence. So they learn about collecting evidence that is objective, evidence that's aligned to our elements in the teaching and learning framework, and evidence that is representative of the lesson. So I'll mainly be focusing on objectivity, but I did want to take an opportunity to kind of explain what alignment and representativeness mean. So alignment is where we get at specific feedback. So if I just transcribed your entire lesson, and then I handed you that script, that may be a lot of robust data, but it's not necessarily going to help you understand, well, I really wanted to know how I was doing in questioning. Now I've got to weed through that and kind of figure out what my feedback is. So what we ask our observers to do is take all that data, all that evidence they collect, and say, what element is that evidence of? So that is what alignment is. Representativeness has to do with the quantity of evidence. So we require that our observers collect an adequate amount of evidence to actually accurately represent what happened in the classroom. So for example, if we think about our questioning element, it wouldn't really be appropriate or sufficient evidence if I just collected one question that a teacher asked and then decided to rate their practice in questioning just on that one element. So what we want to do is collect evidence of all the questions that you asked over maybe multiple lessons and then say, all right, let's look at all those questions that you asked, let's look at the rubric for questioning. Now, what does your practice lie along this continuum of ineffective to highly effective practice? So thinking about objectivity, this has been it seems like such a simple thing, but it's honestly made such a tremendous impact in the conversations that our teachers and our principals are having, because it really is a shift from a lot of what they've been doing. So what we stress in objectivity of evidence is that evidence is something that's factual. It's something that you can see, it's something that you can hear. So it can include things like teacher and student actions. A lot of times when we're first working with principals, they're really focused on the teacher because they're thinking like, I'm here to evaluate teacher practice. But what we really want to look at for teacher practice is what are the kids doing, right? It's not just what am I saying, but what is the kids doing as a result of that. So looking at student actions, and student interactions with each other, especially when the teacher isn't there. Like, you don't want to focus on what this table's doing with me. You want to focus on what that table is doing when I'm not there, right? That's real evidence of my practice that a lot of times is missed. So other things, it can be artifacts prepared by the teacher or student. So it could be my lesson plan. It could be artifacts of student work. And it shouldn't be clouded by personal biases or opinions, obviously. And it should be selected using the professional judgment of the teacher and the school leader. So this is a collaborative evidence collection process that the observer and the teacher go through together. So some examples of evidence could be verbatim scripting. So our principals are working on becoming very excellent typists. They literally go in and they script 60 to 90 minute lessons. And they capture quotes like this one. Bring your whiteboards, markers, and erasers to the carpet and sit on your square. So exactly what the teacher said. They include quantifiable or numeric information. So timestamps a lot of times can be very helpful. So timing transitions, how long do transitions take? Here we have an example of a timestamp, and then we also have a comment here. 2 groups started the assigned project immediately. 1 group talked for 5 minutes before starting. So that's interesting feedback that when I'm in like teacher mode, I don't really always have the time to be, timing how long all my different groups were going and how long it took them to transition. But an observer in my classroom can capture that information for me. It can be non-evaluative statements describing teacher or student observed behavior. So the teacher presented content from the front of the room. It's not evaluative, it's a fact. I'm standing at the front of the room. And it can also describe an aspect of the environment. So how the tables were arranged, some observers draw pictures, some observers take pictures and tag that image of the teacher's classroom as evidence. So keeping in mind these examples and your crash course in what objective evidence looks like, we're going to ask you to go through a little quiz. And it's the end of the day, so we had like a mixed group here. Some of us, Dave and I, wanted to be kind of mean and try and trick you. Lauren and Jolie wanted to be really nice and straightforward, so we tried to arrive somewhere in the middle. What we're going to ask you to do is to read each statement on your own, and then think, is it evidence or is it opinion? And then after we give you a couple minutes to do that, we're going to ask you to work with a partner, share your answers of evidence versus opinion. And then for any statement that is an opinion, we're going to ask you to reword it to make it evidence. So how could somebody have actually captured evidence, or what kind of evidence could they have captured instead of giving that summative kind of opinion statement? Okay? Any questions about what we're going to do? All right, let's try it out. So there are your 4 statements. So you're going to read through them on your own, decide is it evidence or is it opinion. We'll give you a minute to do that when you're working for it. Alright, I'm going to take advantage of that little hush in the room. I don't know if you heard that, but it was like, talk, 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 hush. I'm just going to take advantage of it. So let's start talking about them. So you don't have to have it completely finalized. We're going to work on them together. So what I'm going to ask you to do is give me a thumbs up if it's evidence and give me a thumbs down if you think it's opinion. Evidence, opinion. Okay, so let's start with number 1. The teacher says today's activities are an extension of the matter. Evidence or opinion? So I'm seeing mostly thumbs up, and I would agree with you, that's evidence. To meet our like gold standard of evidence, what we would tell, the feedback we would give this principal or this observer is put some quotes in. Like I'm kind of confused of whether you paraphrase or it's a direct quote. We want it to be a direct quote. Or do like the capital T colon. That's what a lot of observers will do. So that would make it more of the gold standard, but I would agree this is evidence. Let's look at number 2. Students were off task and weren't engaged. Evidence or opinion? So we're seeing that this is opinion. You're correct. So who can give me an example of how you rework that to make it evidence? Yes.
During guided practice, I observed 7 students putting their head down for a period of 45 seconds.
Perfect. So describe the student behavior. 7 students put their head down for 30 seconds, right? What were some other examples of evidence for that one?
Maybe stating they were supposed to be doing one broadcast.
Right, so you could have had what the teacher said. So teacher colon, all right, everybody get out your notebooks and turn and talk to your partner. And then next 6 students had their head on the desk, right? So you're starting to paint the image of what actually happened in that classroom. Yes.
The observer knows it's helpful to like jot down the student names that originally the teacher that we have specifically was these 3 students that did it.
Yep. And a lot of times, sometimes teachers will give their principals like their seating chart, so that they can make notes on that. Kind of like even if it's not the name, they could just number the students, like student 1, student 30, student whatever, and then later the teacher can say, oh, that was Johnny, that was Michael, whatever. Right? Great. Number 3, the new table arrangement encourages concentration and controlled interaction with neighbors. Evidence or opinion? Opinion. Great. So what could you have done to make that evidence?
You could draw the table arrangement.
You could have drawn the table arrangement just to show what the table arrangement actually was. You could have scripted what students were actually saying in those groups, right? To show how did you arrive at this conclusion that it encouraged concentration and controlled interactions? Like, what does that mean? What do you? I mean, it's nice. Like as a teacher, I'd say oh, I did good, I think, but I don't know what to do again. This isn't actually helping me be more thoughtful about my practice.
Yeah, you could mention the new table arrangement, but you also start with what exactly did the teacher say, and how the students follow that. You just write how the students interacted according to what the teacher prompts.
Right, exactly. So that gives us more evidence instead of just assuming a conclusion, right? Because if I just assume a conclusion, that conclusion, for one, may not be correct, and number two, it doesn't really help me as a teacher be more intentional about my work. How about number 4? I assure you that today's lesson will be quite interesting. Evidence or opinion? Some people decided to opt out of this one. But you all are just too good to trick. We were trying to be mean. But you're right, that's evidence. And it's evidence because it's in quotes. A lot of times people are like, but that's somebody's opinion. That was what the teacher said. The teacher said today's lesson is going to be interesting, right? So that is evidence. So we couldn't trick you today. So in thinking about these are somewhat silly examples, but we've seen things like this in real life. We've seen the 2s and the 3s, and we've also seen the 1s and the 4s out there in evidence collection. And we're really moving to a place where we're getting to be more consistent with the kind of evidence that our observers are offering our teachers. So what we want you to think about is putting yourself in the shoes of both a teacher and or a principal. What is the value in presenting objective evidence in a coaching conversation? So if we're thinking about, like, number 2, students were off tasks and they weren't engaged. If I'm the teacher and, like, that's the comment I get on my inbox from, like, the 15 minutes you were in my classroom, how is my reaction going to be as opposed to if you gave me some of the evidence that you all share, right? Of, you know, the 4 students in the back had their head on the table for 30 seconds. What might change about that conversation depending on the quality of evidence that's presented?
You now have action items.
I'm sorry?
You now have action items. You know what you can do
Oh,
next.
you now have action items. Okay, yep, that's true. What else?
Kind of just, circumvents the natural defense mechanism that may arise, especially depending on the relationship between the school leader and the teacher. Because then it's something that you can immediately go and point to and talk about as opposed to, well, this is your opinion.
Right, exactly. So it really changes the conversation. So a lot of times what we saw before were these conversations between teachers and principals that sounded a lot like, well, I think this, well, I think this, well, I feel this, so you made me feel this way, and it was all about the adults and how we felt and what we thought, and nothing about what was actually happening in the classroom. And those conversations not only did not give us specific feedback to get better, but it put up these walls and created these environments at our school sites where teachers didn't want anybody in their classroom, because they're like, if you're just gonna come in and tell me kids weren't engaged and you're not gonna tell me how to get better, then I don't really want you in my classroom. But we know that it's keeping those classroom doors open that actually improves practice. So that's why we've really taken this focus on objective evidence. It seems like such a simple and almost trivial thing, but it's really been something that our principals have really latched onto and has been an early win for us that we've seen really begin to build that trust again between our principals and our teachers, and even like peer-to-peer among our teachers, right? If they know, all right, this is what objective evidence looks like, now maybe I feel more comfortable to let my colleague in my classroom, if we have our common definition of effective practice through the framework, and if we know that we're not going to go in there and make opinions about people, we're just going to go in there and collect data, and then we're going to look at the data together, and we're going to align that against our common definition of effective teaching practice. So you can begin to think about, like, what might that do at a school site, and what might that do in the school system. So, basically, in conclusion, what we're really trying to teach our principals and our observers to do with evidence collection is to stop just doing these drive-by observations where they look into a classroom and arrive at a conclusion. You can't do that, because then we're a victim to our own biases and opinions. Some of us, like, I'm type A, I like things to be organized, so it'd be really easy for me to pop my head into like a really engaging science classroom and be like, it's chaos in there, bad news, bad teacher, bad classroom. But if I went in there and actually collected data, withheld my judgments, aligned it to the framework, interpreted and clarified in collaboration with the teacher, then we might arrive at a different and more accurate conclusion that can actually help us impact teacher practice and student learning. So with that in mind, we're going to let you practice.
We're going to give you the opportunity to watch a video of a teacher and collect some evidence, objective evidence. And this is a video that we've played a lot in our different observer trainings. And this is Miss Rios. She's a second grade teacher. It's a lesson on measurement. And we're gonna show you 2 small clips of the video, so we'll have to pause it and then forward it a little bit. And just really, generally our principals would have their laptops there. They'd be scripting verbatim or trying to everything that the teacher and student says. Don't have your laptops, just jot down as much as you can. Again, objective evidence, hopefully getting student voice as well as teacher voice. So we're gonna, about 5 minutes of video clip we're gonna watch. And I'm potentially gonna have a good teacher moment here and not get the video up, so let's see.
Is there a standard amount of time that's recommended? You're trying so much to make these observations uniform. Has there been any question about what constitutes a long enough time to be a solid observation, or an amount of evidence, even if it's all factual?
A really good question. And what we've said is to watch an entire lesson, and generally we say we give a range like 45 minutes to an hour. We know that there are block schedules at the secondary level, and that may be longer. At kindergarten also 45 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 mini lessons. So, using judgment, but I think our range is 45 to 60 minutes. We have our, again, formal observations are much shorter. And we say those should be about 15 to 20 minutes.
The informal or the scheduled?
Exactly. And those are...
How many teachers is a principal typically doing this with in an annual year?
So the guidelines are a quarter of their staff. So it's, for some, it's, yeah, exactly. Depending on school size, it's...
I'm sorry, I have a question about that. Does a principal have the option? Sorry,
Yes.
bad timing for a question.
No.
Does the principal have an option to observe more than a quarter of their staff?
Do they have the option?
Yes.
Yes.
I know. Okay.
A principal basically has the right to evaluate their teacher and observe them anytime they want.
Right.
Regardless if they're on track to be, exactly. Yes.
Traditionally, though, we've seen that principals tend to observe their teachers every 5 to 8 years, depending on their tenure or probationary status. But one of the things we're looking at is like the frequency of evaluation that is appropriate, given how much more time intensive and labor intensive this evaluation is, but also taking into consideration like incredibly critical kind of staffing decisions that take place at certain points in the teacher pipeline. So those are some of the things that Lauren's going to talk a little bit more about.
I mean, one of the things this process has unearthed is that in some of our bigger comprehensive high schools that have struggled for years, when this was said, okay, we're going to be using this now, this new robust system, this is out, we uncovered, some schools where the teachers had been there for 15, 16, 17 years and had never been evaluated. They had never been observed. There was no record of these folks. And so so along with the probationary teachers, the teachers that are below standard, you had this other outlying group that was like, this has to happen like yesterday. And this is the system that you're going to have to use. So folks have had to become very strategic, have had to delegate as much as possible, and have to call on any and all resources to ensure they're in the classrooms now.
And to that end, so you have to do the training. Can assistant principals be qualified observers?
If they'll go through the 5 days as well, yes.
There's also the other piece of it where teachers were evaluated, but they came in.
Right.
They came in and signed a paper at the end of the year that I was stumped. So there was no pre-conference, no post-conference,
Right.
There was no feedback.
It was just sign here.
Exactly. So we had a lot of that. We have a
In
lot
some
of
cases,
that.
fill it out yourself and sign here.
So David, is the reason that you're able to then identify which teachers went 15 or 16 years because these are all being uploaded in some sort of a technological way rather than just in files?
Well, yeah, so we're going to talk, I don't want to take Jolene's time, but we're going to leave time for questions, but just to quickly answer that, this is one of the first years that we've actually had the full evaluation record online. So before it was entered into an online system, but it was just like, do they meet or not, and I'm submitting it. It wasn't all of the evidence that we've been collecting before, and so then the teacher would sign their paper and put it in a file at their school site, like a file drawer, right? So this is the first year that we're actually requiring that the signature is an electronic signature. It is always accessible on the line.
You all are really asking the exact right questions. You're in the right place. We just want you to experience one more thing before we dive into those, like, man, what does this look like at a school site? What does this look like in a district with 80,000 employees? So that's where we're headed. We want you to have a little more experience before we get there.
So let's watch Miss Rios for 5 minutes. I'm going to break it up in the middle so that we can then get to more of the students working in groups. But get your pens ready. And here we go. What we'd like for you to do now is we're going to ask you to work with your partners and just talk about the evidence that you collected, that one piece of student evidence, teacher evidence, and was it objective evidence that you collected? Have a discussion about it. If not, if it wasn't objective, how could you make it objective? How would you describe some of those scenes, right, using objective evidence? And then the next piece, when you're done with that, we're going to ask you to look at your placemat here. And while we know you don't have the full rubric, you don't have the descriptors, just those pieces of evidence that you were talking about, what might you align them to? So you look at standard 2 or 3, right? That's the classroom environment and the delivery instruction. And see if you can start to align, like, so the questions that she asked for, oh, that's probably going to go under questioning discussion techniques. And see, so this is just a practice of alignment. So once the observer has scripted everything, that's the next step in the process, is how they align it to the specific elements. So we're going to give you, like 5 minutes, work with your partners, and if you have any questions, let us know. Wow. All right. Well, you guys were deep in conversation, so I hope that gave you a little bit of, you know, what it's like to observe and to transcribe just a few moments, align, and just bringing it back to actually the slide that Brittany had talked about or showed you a little while ago, and just, you know, our cycle of the teacher growth and development cycle. And so this little experience here is supposed to be done with, you know, 2 formal observations. There's a pre-conference, the formal observation, a post-conference, then informal observations. So as you can see, it's a pretty robust observation cycle and quite a learning curve for our district. And right now, we just wanted to give you I think we were already, you guys were jumping to, yes.
Sorry. Can you actually give us an example of we had a great discussion, but I have no idea if that's totally off base. Is there just one example you could say that you were just
Oh, of the evidence.
From what we saw.
Okay.
What good looks like there.
Okay.
Or anything here.
So one of the ones that we were talking about in this back table was when Ms. Rubio said, she asked the student if she would work when she came down. Decided the ruler that Ms. Rios used, right? So that would be evidence, quote, right? That's what she said. What element might you put that? So that was not the ruler that Ms. Rios used. So I got a couple ideas over here and then over here.
Well, I was looking at standard 2 under A, creating an environment of respect and rapport. I was looking at teacher interaction with students.
So that's an interesting idea. So I do think that there was part of my evidence that could go there. The fact that I kneeled down and came down to the student's level, that is about the classroom environment. That is about teacher interactions with students. What about the quote? Is that the side of the ruler that Ms. Rios used?
I was thinking standard 3B1, quality and purpose of the question.
So that was one of the questions that I asked. So that was sort of as evidence of the questions that I asked. So those are some examples of evidence. So the fact that Ms. Rios kneeled down by the student's desk, and then she said this. I would break apart that evidence and say this is evidence of this element, this is evidence of that element. So it becomes this hairline differentiation for our principals and our observers that makes alignment very complicated and time consuming. But I mean, as Dave mentioned, with all the elements that we have in our framework and how complicated this process is, a lot of what we share with people is, yeah, it's complicated, but teaching is really complicated, complex work. You guys do some amazing work, and we can't just, we wish we could go in there and do thumbs up, thumbs down, you're good, you're bad, but it's not that easy. And so, the fact that teaching is such important and complex work makes this process that much more complex.
Thank you, sorry.
So just on that, if I'm an administrator and I do this for a teacher and then I use the rubric to say which level they're at, does that then give me some sort of tool to then say, of my teachers, these are like of the 1/4 of my staff that I observed, here's my high performing, here's my middle performing, here's my low performing teachers? Like, is there some sort of larger evaluation other than the individual?
Can we hold that for like 2 minutes?
Sure.
But yes, we will answer a question.
I see there was another question.
So why don't we think about this before we
Yeah, so I think that you guys are all here, right? Your kind of your questions are already getting to this spot. What would this look like in your school system, in your district? And I think some of you are already working with rubrics and maybe have had some experience, but just think about some of that. And then what we want to do is just do like a quick whip around of what's one word that comes to mind when you think about going to wall to wall your school doing this, or even in your district. So we just thought we'd go around and get everyone's one word. So what does this make you think of? What comes to mind? What's the word? Let's start over here.
Do you want me to go out of the word? Inconsistent.
Inconsistent.
Optimistic.
Thoughtful.
I'll say similar to like what's going on in high school.
Similar.
I'll use Kaya's word, approximate.
Detailed. Rights details?
Coaching.
Fidelity.
Subjective.
Complex. Time consuming.
Exciting, but a little scary.
Couple words.
Yeah, sorry.
Comprehensive.
Overwhelming.
Time consuming. Abstract.
Did I hear one last word?
All right, so now we're going to transition just a little bit, and we're going to leave some time for questions, so please keep all of those in mind. I've written down some of the things that you guys are probably thinking of, especially all those really wonderful words that we haven't thought about at all this whole time we've been doing this work. But so like we said before, we've been kind of doing this now, rolling out, making a lot of revisions, making a lot of changes over the past couple of years. And we think we've had some wins in the past couple of years, especially this past year. We actually implemented at scale across 900 plus schools, 1,500 administrators, and are making change in how we do this type of an observation. So some of that is actually what we're seeing in the evidence. Our evidence of what's happening is that people are actually moving to collecting really objective evidence. That is not one of the challenges that we're seeing for our observers. So there may be, like Seth I think was saying, inconsistent, or was that your word?
Yeah.
There may be some places where we are still working, and this is an evolving process, but objectivity is something that we're seeing is a lot stronger, and people are coming to these collaborative conversations with teachers with evidence to talk about. The other thing that has become very consistent across the district is just this common language around what does effective practice look like. We're starting to see these places where it's not just the teaching and learning team that comes there with the teaching and learning framework to do a classroom observation, but we're starting to see principals on their regular classroom walkthroughs that they do on a regular basis using the teaching and framework language. So now it's not classroom climate means what school A thinks it means and what school B thinks it means and what I as a principal think it means. We're all talking about the same thing when we're talking about classroom climate. And then the last thing is we are now coming to, and it's a work in progress, a uniform process for developing a final evaluation rating for a teacher. So in LA Unified, historically, teachers meet or they're below. They meet standard or they're below standard, and 99% of teachers are meets. But what does that mean? What feedback does that provide for a teacher? How does a principal even come to that decision? And so now we're actually getting to a place where there is a process to come to that decision. And what that final decision looks like is changing, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But at least there's 2 formal observations. There's expectations for what that looks like, and there's expectations for how it happens and how frequently and all of those things, and those decisions throughout the year roll up to help inform what we're doing for final evaluation rating for our teacher. So that's great, but we're still in this is a lot of work that we're taking on and as a district. And to a lot of your points earlier, how do we scale this with fidelity? So we have trained now 1,500 plus, even 2,000 administrators in this process. But there's challenges. You then have to take your data and you have to decide where that data and that evidence places a teacher on a continuum of practice. And we need to make sure that people are making those decisions about teacher ratings consistently across our district. And that's something we've really worked on, and something that we know is still a challenge to make sure that this is a fair and equitable process. We've moved to a place where we feel like people are taking objective evidence. This idea about accuracy and making sure that this is really done well is something that we still are working on. And then, yes, Naya.
My understanding was that in terms of where this comes from, like Dr. Daisy himself would go into classrooms and actually script, like from the very top of the chain per se, there were people saying like, this is important enough that I'm going to observe in the same way. Is that
yes?
Right?
Yes. So he actually did observe a teacher. He went through the whole process with a teacher and scripted his lesson, aligned the evidence, all of that stuff, had the collaborative conversations with the teacher. But the way we talk about it is inter-rater agreement. So if all of us in the room leave today and we go to a school tomorrow and we observe that lesson and we all leave and independently say with our evidence and our alignment and everything what that teacher's level of practice is that we would all say the same thing. So that's our goal, really getting to the place where everybody's equipped to do that and that they're going to be saying the same thing when they leave that classroom.
And that's the last part of the observer certification. We don't even have 10 seconds to touch on, which is accuracy. So I talked about 3 of the 4 competencies that our observers must be certified in. And the last one is accuracy. Like, do you accurately use that evidence to appropriately place somebody on that continuum?
And so the next thing, you guys, a lot of people, I hear time consuming, I hear overwhelming, I hear all those things. This is a very rigorous process and it takes a lot of time. And we have seen that the principals that were in our first pilot and have practiced over the year, they're getting better, but it's still more time. And so that's a really critical issue for us, is how do we make sure that they have the time to do this work and do it well and do it with quality. As well as building instructional capacity. And it's not even building instructional capacity, a principal, especially in our district where we've had a lot of budget cuts and you may be an elementary principal with 50 plus teachers and you're the sole administrator on that campus, you still have to take care of operations. How do we build the capacity so that they can actually get into those classrooms and do this work? And then, I don't want to minimize this last bullet.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lauren. So in that example, when you say building instructional capacity, is it building the capacity of the principal essentially to do this work more accurately and more efficiently? Or is it leveraging like teacher leaders or other people in the building to also aid and distribute the work?
All of those. I think all of those.
It's all of those things. The discussions I've had with principals have been akin to, I'm going to go back and use the T word, been to like a therapy session, where we're literally looking at the capacity you have just at your school site and the teacher leaders who may be under uniforms. And so to figure out now, how can you honestly utilize the leaders that you have here to get inside the classroom? It's also been looking at how our instructional leaders are coached. And does the coaching of our instructional leaders need to change? Because if they're not being coached to be expert coaches, then yeah, something has to change. Because this is begging the instructional leaders to not only go in, have the fidelity to do this in a timely manner. But once you see where, pinpoint where a person is developing or ineffective, it's now time to have that coaching conversation and to figure out key next steps. Gearing up for not only the second observation, but also ensuring that, as the teacher gets better, students win. So you're right, this is definitely a two-pronged attack. How are they being coached? And then how are they building the leadership capacity at their school so that they can take away some of the things that have kept the administrator, from the classroom?
And then this last bullet is just now we have a lot of really great evidence, and our principals are having some really great conversations with their teachers and providing feedback and providing this information. But how do we help everybody get better and have this growth mentality and help all of our teachers, all of our certificated staff, all of our district really just get better at everything that they're doing? So I'm gonna, the last thing we're gonna talk about is just how this fits in with our human capital approach. And so we saw this slide, so I'm gonna jump through. But, so, human capital, we talked a lot today about teacher growth and development cycle. This one small kind of piece of the puzzle. And as we talked about a lot of these challenges, there's other areas that as a district we're starting to work on and really focus on and make sure that we're working collaboratively across our district to really support human capital and all of our employees as educators and all of our employees as effective educators. So currently we're working a lot on teacher growth and development cycle. We're also piloting the school leader growth and development cycle, which, like we said before, some components of that are really closely aligned with our teacher growth. So school leaders, an expectation and an element in their framework is conducting frequent observations and providing feedback to teachers, quality feedback to teachers. And it's developing a language about what does that mean? What does that look like? And having a common language around that. So we have these pieces, but as we've been talking about, this is an evaluation is a tiny piece of this work. And really we're getting all of this really great and objective data to start to leverage talent, to help people identify places for them to grow. And so we have a few initiatives, and I think in another session before it mentioned that we received a teacher incentive fund grant over the past couple of years that has kind of fueled a lot of work in our district to move some of this. And the first one is the Human Capital Data Warehouse. And it's an initiative that we're working on where data has been stored in human resources, in IT, in new teacher programs, and they've all been all over the place. And we haven't really had, to this question from before, a way to see all of this information about an employee in one place. So we're doing a huge effort in our district to kind of pull all that data together and have access and reporting tools for school site principals to see this data and to be able to say, to your question earlier, I know that this teacher has this many years of experience, they came from this really amazing program, they have taught all of these courses before. We've never been able to see over time what a teacher has actually taught unless you kind of look back at that. And to the point of all these observations, like what have their ratings been? What are some of the areas of growth for my school site? Or where teachers are really, really strong with academic language and I might put them with a different student population. So some of that is being able to kind of get that data in the hands of somebody that can do something about it, making it actionable. The next thing that we haven't moved forward as much on is career pathways, and also with the Teacher Incentive Fund, talking about now that we have potentially a definition of what an effective teacher is, or we get from MEETS and below, how do we retain those people? How do we leverage their talent and what they are really great at to make sure that other people are learning from them? And then also learning management. So all of what Brittany is working on is a professional learning management system where we can create collaborative communities across our district. We're in a huge effort right now to create PD that's actually aligned to the teaching and learning framework. So that's brick and mortar, come to this PD session, but also resources, also communities where teachers can reach out across the district and work together on people that are all working on how do I improve in academic language. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about, and again, we focused a lot today on like what does this process look like for teachers, but it really fits into this larger picture of going back to what our goal is of ensuring that every student is in front of an effective teacher in a school led by an effective leader and supported by effective staff. So with that, we want to kind of just open it up a little bit. We have some time. I know that you guys, I don't know if that answered your question fully, but that's where we're getting to. The way that the teacher's final evaluation process is at the moment is still at the end of the year. We note that a teacher meets standard or is below. So it doesn't, to your point earlier, like have as much differentiation as we might like, but we are getting to a place where we actually have a lot more data throughout the year of what's happening in a teacher's instructional practice.
So I have sort of a comment and then also a real question. So I live and work in Tennessee, and I don't think Kevin Huffman mentioned it in the kind of opening thing this morning, but I've heard him say on other occasions that he believes what's led Tennessee to such growth is the fact that Tennessee's implemented teacher evaluation, the fact that teachers are, because Tennessee was in a similar state of like teachers getting feedback once every 10 years, and he thinks the fact that teachers are now getting continuous feedback has led to this, pretty remarkable growth. So I think that's exciting for you all. The actual question is, does this kind of framework, is this the same for like art teachers and PE and music teachers and things like that? Because I would foresee that. That's a challenge we've had in Tennessee, and I'm curious how y'all approach that.
Yeah, so I'll answer it, but I want to anybody and Ellie can jump in. That is something that we've been getting a lot of feedback about. A lot of districts don't do, they might have a DC, for example, actually has different frameworks for different types of teachers. And that's something that we've started to look at. The first group that we did a pilot with was actually early education teachers this past school year, and we're going live for stakes with early education teachers this next coming school year. And another population we've spent a lot of time starting to talk about is special ed, especially for in populations that are moderate to severe, where something like discussion techniques may not, and teachers' feedback is, in my classroom, I may not be able to get to the highly effective level because my students aren't going to be doing those types of discussions. It's just not going to happen in my classroom. So we've been doing pilots, and we've been actually meeting with a lot of different departments, with special education teachers, getting feedback, actually using tools from other districts and going out to observe and see and test them out. So those are things we're really thinking about and have kind of teams working on, but at the moment we don't have them in action yet.
There are definitely things that we have different members of our team are working with, like the department that works with arts teachers. I've been definitely working with the folks who cover PE to really look at how the framework, what parts of the framework really speak to the PE teachers, and I'm also working with the administrators who are principals at alternative schools. Where this is the last option for a student before they're actually, exited out of the district, but this is their option, and those schools look so drastically different across the board. So this is a year where we're really going to come together with the framework to look at how it's going to look for that.
Also, there's just a conversation going back to your question, Kate, about having different focus elements, right, for those schools and for those classrooms. Special ed has said persistence is really important, teachers' persistence, right? So that's not one of our focus elements right now, but maybe that needs to be in a special ed environment.
So the scale is just enormous, right? And in full disclosure, I didn't know this, but I was part of this team. It's just kind of scary that I knew that. So huge kudos to y'all. But my question actually is to the first win. The scale is so enormous, and to hear you all sort of pretty much confidently say people did this. I have great super close friends that I know are brilliant teachers, and the time-consuming, what did you guys do? What do you attribute that you turned the dial and actually got people to do this? Just the evidence piece. What did it take? I was part of lots of discussions of people complaining, but I'm not hearing that. So what?
do you think has, and I'm sure it's not like all rosy, but there are some like serious bright spots. Like what do you attribute, what do you all attribute that to?
I think that the objectivity piece, when you think about being accurate and aligning and collecting enough evidence, like those things are really difficult, whereas like we can teach somebody what objective evidence is in like 15 minutes. And that can really fundamentally change conversations that you have with teachers. I think when you look at the competencies that we're teaching principals in terms of observation, objectivity is kind of the low-lying fruit. I think it's one of the things that people find easiest to grasp onto first. And so it's you know, I mean, I may not be able to script an entire lesson. I can't type that fast, I can't write that fast, but at least those few bits of evidence that I do get can be objective. Or I may not have like that in-depth knowledge of the teaching and learning framework yet because I've just finished like a couple of days of training, but I can understand that I should be looking at what I hear and what I see in a classroom instead of like going to assumptions. And I think that that's been kind of one of the reasons, but I also think that like a lot of what we've heard from principals and teachers has been like, show me what this practice looks like. Like I want to see it. Like in doing learning management work, a lot of what people want is videos. Like I want to see what this looks like this framework is really great, but I want to see it come to life. And I think that part of why we really stress objective evidence is like we need to learn what it looks like in LA. Because we can pull videos from all different kinds of places and whatever, but we really need to learn from and leverage our talent in LA. So that's one of the other reasons why objective evidence is so important, because that's what helps us learn when things are working for students in our school district. So I mean, that's just kind of like my personal opinion of why it's been, I think, one of the things that it's taken us for.
So related to where my mind went with this, and like there are like smart people all over the country doing the same work, and I guess my question for you guys is like we've come to this place with Common Core where we're trying to find like it's the nature of our country and Federalist Papers and like the history of like education being decentralized, and I get that, but like at some point we've embraced this idea, many people, that there should be common standards for kids in Tennessee and Texas, and there's some local control. And I guess I wonder where do you think maybe this work is headed so that there can be a convergence? And everybody seems to be using some version of Danielson, but every district's ending up in 61 or slightly different places. And you guys are working so hard on this, and people in other districts are working so hard on this, and like how we get it to be that a good teacher in Massachusetts is a good teacher in Mississippi, and that there's still some local variability, but like 90% of what we believe good teaching and what we're looking for when we do this is the same, and then there's a little bit of local variability. So like where do you see this headed with that, instead of everybody being focused on my district and my teachers?
I think that, for me, I'll feel that. I think that's one of the reasons why I came here. Okay, because I think that Teach for America can be a strong catalyst to hopefully unify some of this work. I've been on the phone and emailing a gentleman by the name of John Davis, who works in DC Public Schools, right? He's a Baltimore principal, DC Public Schools, but I worked with him in 1997 at the Houston Institute, and we've been friends ever since. He's been doing this work. He's been coaching principals. And so I've talked to him about what's going on with DC Impact. Okay, I've talked to Jeremy Beard, who's a good friend of mine from 95, and who's been in Houston. And we've looked at some of the things that he's done, some of the similarities and some of the differences. Also, been in contact with a good buddy of mine, Ian Wells, in Colorado, who's a school principal. See, these are the reasons why. Besides, of course, the t-shirt and it's in Vegas and we get a mug and all this other stuff. These are the reasons why, I'll say for me, I come to these institutes to reconnect with folks who I know are doing the same work. And if we can sort of help each other, if we can sort of, or at least illuminate something and say, here's something I didn't even think about, with regards to this framework, or with regards to something else. Because you're absolutely right. Like, there is going to be some variability between DC, Tennessee, Colorado, LA, and New York. But there are going to be some things that are very similar. and very light. Now, I don't know how to sort of codify that and streamline that. I'm going to leave that to the TFA professionals who are running this whole thing. But I will say that, you know, when they talk about the alumni network and the alumni, you know, this, that, and the other, that's about picking up the phone. That's about picking up the phone. That's about taking 2 steps back, looking at what you do, remembering the time you spent at the institute, remembering those 2 years, and then really reaching out to those connections that you made.
I also wonder about like what this work across the country is going to do to teacher prep programs, right? Because that's where I see it really impacting the teacher pipeline, right? Because we are learning more and more about what it takes to be an effective teacher in the classrooms across this country, and that converging with Common Core state standards, I think, is going to send a more unified message to teacher prep programs about like what we expect of teachers that can teach in our school districts across the country. So I kind of see, I mean, if I look in like the crystal ball, I wonder myself what that might do, and if that might actually kind of create this more uniform vision.
So we're actually out of time, so I'm going to put up this last slide that has our emails and our website. But we'll stick around for a few minutes if you guys have more questions. I know Steve Zimmer, our board member, is here if you guys have stuff you want to chat with him or meet him. And we're really, thank you guys for coming to our session and everything. It's been a wonderful
Friday afternoon lesson.